Chapter 80. The Copelands were the first in line out of St. Peter's parking lot, riding in Jerry's green Cadillac Escalade. They were headed towards Satchel Hill when they spotted the cops blocking off Annie Potts Road. Jerry was content to drive by, but his wife said he should ask what all the fuss was about. He was about to tell her not to be such a busybody when Dennis suggested it was a good idea to demonstrate his concern. The election was in November. Jerry gave in. Dennis possessed a keen business mind. He would be something special in the world of high finance one day, unlike his other useless son. Dennis shook his head, almost reading his father's thoughts. Too bad that didn't work the other way around. Too bad for Jerry. Dennis didn't care about the elections. He wanted to know what was happening. He just knew the right buttons to push. Dabney never learned that. Dennis had a doctorate in getting around their old man. He needed to. If Jerry ever found out about his visits to Provincetown or Greenwich Village, Dennis shuddered to think what he would do. Jerry rolled the window down. He motioned for an officer to come over to him. His heart leaped into his throat. The woman approaching the car was the same black cop that arrested him the other day. Jerry silently groaned. "Mr. Copeland?" Officer Kate Pierce said. She scowled behind her mirrored sunglasses. "Can I help you?" "We were concerned about the commotion," Jerry said. His eyes never broke contact with her lenses. "Is something wrong?" "The boy's dead," Kate replied. She didn't like the look on his face. She silently prayed for a reason to bust him again. "It looks like an accident, maybe suicide. The detectives are investigating." "Good Lord," Denise gasped. "Who is it?" "Well, I really can't say," Kate began. Dennis interrupted her. "It looks like Frank Garrison's house, Mom," he said. Like father, like son, Kate thought. Jerry watched a crowd gather. People from the funeral parked their cars and walked over to the barricade. He mumbled thanks to Officer Pierce and reluctantly pulled the Escalade onto the shoulder. Jerry wanted to go home, not screw around here. But Dennis was right. He needed to demonstrate his concern for these idiots. Jerry climbed out and joined the other parents with Denise and the kids behind him. Robert Bigelow fielded questions from a concerned group of Lancaster residents. A detective walked over with a tiny evidence bag filled with little square camouflage-colored pieces of paper. Virginia remarked, "LSD," to her husband. She said it loud enough for most of the group to hear her. Thomas nodded. Jerry was next to them. He wondered how she knew that was LSD. He wouldn't be surprised if she were a drug addict. Stupid liberal. Thomas was too good of a lawyer to screw around with, so Jerry kept his mouth shut. An ambulance arrived. Its lights flashed, but its siren was silent. Larry Singleton looked nervously at the police. There was a quarter-pound of pot stashed underneath the oxygen masks. They waved him through the barricade and directed him to the Garrison's house. Robert and Kate ordered the crowd to go home. They didn't want anyone to catch a glimpse of Frank's corpse. It was truly disgusting after a day exposed to the elements, with insects crawling all over it. Ick. Jerry was glad. He'd seen all he cared to see. He volunteered his vocal support to leave the officials to their duty and went back to his Escalade. He arrived at the estate in record time and followed his family inside. Denise made a beeline for her medicine cabinet and her Xanax. Diana found Tammy making lunch in the kitchen. Dennis jogged up the grand staircase to his suites. Jerry closed the door to his study and sighed. He went over to his desk and slid into the big leather chair. "I hope that's the last funeral I have to attend in my life, except my own," Jerry thought, rubbing his temples. He wouldn't have gone in the first place, but after the altercation between Dabney and Derek, who seemed scrawny when Jerry saw him, convincing him Dabney was the biggest pussy on the planet, he had to show up. The Mellons might not think twice about suing if he showed contempt for their loss. The fact they were so civic-minded only prodded him further. Jerry did not like mingling with the cattle. He wouldn't do it again if he could help it. He considered them beneath him. "It is nice to see someone with a concept of superiority," a woman's voice said. "It must be your German blood speaking to you." Jerry's gaze snapped toward the leather sofa under the window. Margaret Adler was sitting on it, with her feet on the coffee table. "Holy!" Jerry exclaimed, standing. "How did you get in here?" "I walked in," Miss Adler scowled. Her eyes started glowing. "Sit down, Mr. Copeland. Now." Jerry sat in his chair. He struggled, but he couldn't move. "Oh, God," he cried. "It's true. You're a witch. Just don't hurt me, all right? We can work it out, whatever it is." Miss Adler shook her head. The light from her eyes dimmed a little. "I did not come by to hurt you, Jerry. Can I call you Jerry?" Jerry whimpered. Her eyes narrowed. "You're a lot braver when you are mistreating your son," she remarked coldly. "There is something you are going to do for me, Jerry. Then I am going to do something for you." "What do you want?" Jerry asked, fear bringing a lump to his throat. He swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" She leaned back on the sofa. Her face became stern. Her eyes glowed more brightly. Jerry felt something strange in his head, like fingers touching his brain. Miss Adler told him, "You will call your lawyer and drop the charges against Jack Dougan. I want him out of jail this afternoon. Is that understood?" "No way!" "Yes," Jerry replied, his face clouding. His eyes rolled back into his head. "Yes, of course. Whatever you want." "Good," Miss Adler smiled, her fingernails digging into the leather. "Now, I will do something for you." "What are you going to do for me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I am going to pull a thorn out of your side, Jerry," Miss Adler said. "Dabney is mine." Jerry's mind filled with images of his son's impending fate. He saw the killer, but not his face. He saw Dabney's murder, vicious and painful. Jerry never saw anything so horrible in his life, yet he agreed with barely a moment's consideration. Jerry asked, "Will they find his body?" "The insurance, well, you know." Miss Adler laughed. "Oh, yes," she replied, her eyes turning to normal. "I guarantee it." "Fine," Jerry said. "It's a deal." He picked up the phone and dialed his lawyer. Miss Adler stared at him. I did not even have to push him, she thought. How black-hearted. He should have been in the SS. Upstairs, Dabney was preparing to go back to the McKee's house. He had a great time last night. He didn't know anything that felt as good as being with them made him feel. He liked it. He wanted more of it. The thought of staying with Chris this time made him so happy his face beamed with permagrin. He couldn't get away from the estate fast enough. He changed into white satin shorts, a navy blue tank top, and a pair of Versace Napa leather Achilles sneakers. He was glad no one tried to force him to go to the funeral the way his bruises. Dabney's mind went blank in the middle of that thought. He had another destination for today that filled him with a sense of urgency. Dabney slipped out of his room, went downstairs, walked outside, and climbed into the black Mercedes waiting for him in the driveway.